Hey guys, welcome back, and I'm really excited about the video today. From the intro, you can see that we're going to be talking about buck knives, and not just any buck knife, but the history of buck knives. Really interesting history. This is a homegrown, all-American knife company. Still is fourth generation. Is running the company. The great grandson of Hoyt Buck is running the company today. They're doing a fantastic job. I love their knives, by the way. And if you saw the intro, I took those photographs right off their website. So that's kind of what Buck is trying to promote. And it's basically, a backwoods country type of knife company. They're still heavily involved with that today. But they're also producing a lot of things. They're producing automatic knives, modern folders, and I just think they're a really innovative and good company if you're looking to buy a good knife. I would definitely grab one. So the story starts out with Hoyt Buck. Hoyt Heath Buck was his name. And in 1908, he was a trained blacksmith, and he was working in logging. I don't know why, but he made a few knives, and I guess he liked it. It was his hobby, knives like these. And as we go through and I show you different pictures from different time frames, you're going to see that these things are amazingly consistent. So this is a Buck 120, but his knives had the same profile, pretty much the same handle, different manufacturing techniques, but they've stayed pretty consistent through time, and they just work. So he made a few knives, and people started saying, hey, I'd like to have a knife like that. And so Hoyt Buck was producing and selling people his knives, and I think that was pretty much a pastime for him. Maybe to bring in some extra money, but he basically used the steel from old files, and that's how he made his knives. And around 1910, he had his son Al Buck. You probably are aware of that name. And as time went on, in 1932, Al went into the Coast Guard, spent 8 years, got out in 1940, and moved to San Diego. So by this time, Hoyt was living in Mountain Home, Idaho. He was a minister now, and he was making knives as a sideline to make money. So he's had a lot of experience making these knives. And war broke out, World War II, 1941. And he made a lot of knives for guys going overseas. And he had guys come back from overseas and say, hey, my buddy had a knife. Can you make me that same kind of knife? And so he had a pretty good side business going on making knives. And really the thing that separates Hoyt Buck from a lot of people is he had a very good proprietary heat treatment. And so his knives were not only durable and rugged, but they maintained their edges really well. And so that served him well. After World War II, he moved to San Diego to be closer to his son. And during that time, he talked his son into making knives. And so they both began making knives in a warehouse in Old Town, San Diego. And it was initially just the two of them. And so in 1961, he incorporated, moved, and hired somebody else, and they started making knives full time. So he mainly used a mail order during this time frame between the 1940s to 1960s. But after 1960, he started going out, and he would go to sporting goods stores to sell his knife. And if you look right here, you see there's a knife, a nail, and a hammer. And that's how Hoyt Buck sold his knives. So he went into stores and took a 10-penny nail and put it on the counter, and then hammered one of his fixed blades through the nail. And that pretty much sold it, because afterwards the knife was still sharp. And so that proprietary heat treatment he did allowed him to cut through nails with these knives. I imagine you could still do it. I don't know. I've never tried it. But pretty interesting marketing scheme. I believe it was LL Bean who contacted him and said, hey, we want you to make some knives for us. And that was his big break. Once he started making knives for LL Bean, everything took off. And so in 1949, Hoyt passed away, and Al took over the business and was making knives alone. In 1959, his son Charles joined him in the business. At that time, they moved to Old Town, San Diego, to a workshop there, and started in 1961 was the first time they used commercial forging. So they were using a commercial forger in Los Angeles to make his blades, and then they put them together in San Diego. And it wasn't long before they needed bigger facilities. And the knives prior, up until this time, up until about 1960, the knives had a full tang. It was a rat tail tang with a nut up here. And after 1962, they started pinning their knives. I think you can see it right there. You see the pin? And so they hid the, there's still a barrel nut in here, but it's pinned through here. And consistently, they've used these plastic type handles. Very early on, you see the pictures, they were lucite handles. Later on, they changed it to different chemical that they use, always trying to improve those knives. Then in 1962, Al Buck decided that he wanted to produce a hunting knife. Okay, so all of these are hunting knives, of course, but he had not produced a folder. And so he started working on this knife in 1962. This is called the Buck 110. And this is when things really, really took off for Buck. This 110, it's a large knife, has a lock back, made out of brass. It's heavy, and they had genuine wood handles on them. These knives originally were 1/2 inch wide. After a revision, they went to 9/16 inch wide, and they're just really durable. This knife here dates between 1972, 1978. It's one of the earliest ones I could get a hold of. It's a two dot. I'll show you that right there. It's a little 2 dot right there. You can see the dot on it. All Buck knives were always marked with Buck on the Ricasso. And so in 1964, the 110 comes out, and by 1969, the 112 came out. And the 112 is the same thing as a 110. It's just a little slimmer and a little smaller than the 110, a little more easy to use. But these knives just, man, I tell you what, this was a Grail knife when I was growing up. Excuse me, I grew up in the 60s, and I always wanted to get a hold of a buck 10. And this is a knife guys wanted to have right here. They're just awesome knives. And so, they were tremendously successful. So the thing is, like in the 1800s, they had the Coke bottle knife. In 1922, you had the old Remington Trapper come out, awesome knife, and you had the Case 6532 come out in about that same time frame, around 1920. But for the most part, big knives, big pocket knives had just gone away. And by the 60s, really the only people making big knives was that Case 6532. And yeah, it has two blades, but it doesn't lock. And so Buck's idea was he sold his 110 with a sheath. So you move this pocket knife from the pocket to the outside to your belt, and it became a belt knife that you could use to skin deer with. You could do about anything with these. I remember growing up, my dad was a contractor, and on a lot of construction sites, you saw a lot of these things, guys carrying these on construction sites. And that was part of the popularity of those knives. In 1966, Buck got into making pocket knives. So the first pocket knives was the 301, which is a 3 7/8 inch Stockman. In the the 303, this knife here, 303, which was a 3 1/4 inch Stockman. And then the Cadet, which was 2 5/8 inch two blade knife. And this knife here is a pretty rare knife. So initially, Buck was not set up to make knives, and so these were contract knives. The first people to make these knives was Schrade, and you had Buck made in the USA on them, but on the other blades, they were marked Buck. And that's how you can tell the difference between a Schrade made Buck and a Camillus made Buck. After 2 years, the contract went to Camillus. So from 1968 on, Camillus made these knives for Buck, whatever they were. Buck made the fixed blades, Camillus made the knives. So this is a really interesting knife here. You know, a very, very early Buck traditional knife. So once it got to Camillus, Camillus kind of opened up the line. They produced a lot of knives. This is a 313, which is a hunting type knife. It's got a skinning blade like a muskrat. I'm sorry, I had a little brain freeze there. So Camillus is making these knives. These are called the 300 series knives. And then in 1975, the 500 series knives come out. And these were slimmer knives. This is a 511 right here, produced in between 1980 and 1986, sometime in there. And then in 1979, they produced the 700 series. So this is a 700 series knives. These were, Buck always produced the 700 series knives, started doing it in 1979, and they're higher quality than the Camillus made knives. A lot of different variations of this knife right here. And then in 1984, they opened a new plant in El Cajon, California. From that period on, Buck produced all of their knives in El Cajon, California. And so these are just really, really nice knives. This is a 379 pack of wood. This is made in China. So a lot of guys see these knives and they wonder, oh, Buck's not making knives in the U.S. anymore. You can see the China on that right there. So around 2000, Buck started producing knives in China. The highest percentage of knives ever made for Buck in China was 13%. So today, that number is, or I'm sorry, 30%. So today that number is down to 13. So 85% of their knives that Buck produces are made in the U.S. and around 13 to 15% are made in China. And mainly, you know, their newer, inexpensive line of knives, folding knives, are made in China. This is one right here. This is a little Buck I bought for $9. Amazing little knife, really. It's aluminum handled, rubber grips here, pocket clip, you know, nice little folder, liner lock. It'll do the job. It's really amazing for the price of this knife, but they've got some really nice modern folding knives now, and not all of those are made in China. The less expensive ones are. Most of the time when you go to a big store like Sportsman's Paradise or something like that, Cabela's, those knives are made in China. The American-made knives are usually sold through retailers like Smoky Mountain Knife Works or DLT Trading, something like that. Okay, what else we got for you? All right, that's about it. I think they're a fantastic knife. Really interesting history. This is still a family-run company. I think they're amazingly innovative. They've not been afraid to step out there and do different things. And so I think they're a great knife. If you've never had a Buck knife, you know, to go ahead and check them out. They're still a really viable hunting knife. We have all kinds of exotic knives today, but it's just hard to improve on this knife. It's a basic hunting knife. And man, it has really done the job for me. I've used it for years. I've had this knife since 1976 is how long I've had this knife. And beat on it and abused it, and it's never broke on me. There's some cool scratches on it though. You can see there. I've used this thing. All right. I really appreciate you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks again.